think it's the first time I do it so in a rush. Good morning, everybody. So I will give you today a presentation on this topic. I'm sure many of you have heard of this. It's been discussed by us for a long time. I was involved in the rulemaking task that created the revision from Part 21, and I joined the preparation of the certification memo. What you see on the screen is a summary of the main regulations that have been prepared. It affected both Part 21 and maintenance regulations. They were effective in May 2022, and we identified that despite the Part 21 provided AMC and guidance on the topic, there were items that needed more details. That's why we published a certification memo. The cert memo has been published last year for comments. We had some comments to address, and now it's available at this link. So I guess you will receive this presentation after you can access this link. As you will see, it's at issue 2. I will explain why, but good point to start with is cert memo is available for use. So why this issue was tackled by our regulations and guidance? I would say there are two main aspects. One is, as we all know, in aviation, there are parts which are not coming from aviation. It makes sense that we use them, but we have to make them being used in the right way. The second aspect is that, which is linked. POA, it's a very robust and safe, and it works. I think we like it. There are pros and cons. There are difficulties sometimes, but we all like to enjoy the safety of Part 21 and what POA means. But sometimes this is too much in some areas, so there was a need to identify where we can accept to do less. And that's why we ended up with this regulation. Some examples here, it's not limited to that. I think there was ideas in the beginning to really focus just on commercial off-the-shelf part. Some of you may be aware of the initiative of the FAA on that, which is focusing on commercial parts. We decided to take a broader approach and identify parts that can be installed without a Form 1. Of course, commercial parts are also included, but it's not limited to that. So in a nutshell, the main regulation affected is 307. It was already there. There were already derogations in that regulation that could be used to install parts without Form 1. Those derogations are not changed, so they can still be used as it was before. There was some renumbering of them because we had to provide some clarifications, but those regulations, which are today B1 and B2, they are not changed. What has changed, which you see here on the screen identified as new, is the derogation in 3, 4, 5, and 6. And I will explain them today, so I will not focus on the details on this slide. B3 and B4. B3, I would say, is the main one, and that's occupy 80% of the certification memo. Is the derogation according to which a design approval holder can identify parts that in the case of a non-conformity of the part, so we are discussing just about the manufacturing of the part, not the design of the part. So if the design is not conforming to if the part is not conforming to the design, then if the effect of such a non-conformity are negligible, that part can be identified in the ICA of the aircraft as not requiring a Form 1. So it's very important. It has to be done by the design approval holder. I will explain also what it means. It's not very clear, but here is specific verification activities. So those can be also used by the design approval holder to help identify those parts. But I will explain this better in the next slides. In B4, it's similar to 3. It makes the link to CS10. As many of you know, CS10 provide designs which are approved already at the regulation level, so they don't have to be reapproved. And also for those parts, EASA can identify that some of those parts do not require a Form 1. I'm sorry about the coloring. It appeared different on the laptop. I realize it's not very easy to read, but somehow it does. So that's the first AMC, to B3 and B4, which explains part of the concept and explain that verification activities can be added to ICA to identify if some parts can be installed without Form 1. What does it mean? It means that the design approval order will have to do an assessment, which I will explain. And with that assessment, they can identify that the effect of a non-conformity are acceptable because they have a negligible effect. And it may be that as part of the compliant demonstration, there were some activities that they were the only critical part for that part. And they can translate those activities into verification activities. An example is provided here. So, for example, if for a cabin interior part, the only issue was about flammability, and in that case, if they can provide to the installer such instruction, the installer, if the installer can check that flammability requirements are met with a certificate, for example, then the part can be eligible for one. But it's important that this assessment is done by the design approval order. Another important point, which is in the guidance material, it's explaining what negligible safety effect when installed on the product means. And we have identified this in two different ways. That's guidance, of course, but it provides direction for the assessment. And we have made distinction in depending on the criticality of the aircraft. So for ELA 1 and 2, a part to have whose non-conformity to have a negligible safety effect has to respect these three criteria at the worst. For those of you familiar with 1309, those are similar to the definition of minor safety effect. There were some adjustments because, of course, it's a different assessment. We are not doing an FHA here. We are doing an assessment of the potential failure in case of a non-conformity, but some criteria can be considered there as well. While for any other aircraft, we have similar definitions, but with more conservatism. And in this case, again, 1309 is a link, clearly, as you can see. And but in this case, we looked at the criteria for no safety effect. So if after the assessment, they can conclude that this is the effect in case of a non-conformity, then that part can be eligible for not requiring a Form 1, if the design approval holder wants to do it. So they have to decide to do it. They don't have to. It's not a must for them. They can take the option, but it must be done by the design approval holder. Then we have 5 and 6, which are two additional points. 5 is pointing to OPS rules. You may be aware that some parts in the OPS are identified to not requiring to be approved according to part 21. So those parts as well can be installed without Form 1. And 6 is just clarifying that if a part is part of a higher assembly for which the derogation was used, then also those subparts can be eligible for Form 1. Again, if the design approval holder wants to do it. And last but not least, 307C is explaining that even in that case, but this should not be an issue, because of course we want to have a minimum of assurance that the part comes conforming to the design. So in every case, even for parts where Form 1 is not required, there must be something that attests conformity, can be a certificate of conformity, and but not only that. And here as well as a memo, but I will cover this point, explain what kind of document we can expect. And now a few words on the certification memo. As I explained, we had already issued one. It was published, I think, around 2013, if I'm not mistaken, which identified what was the derogation back then. Back then, the derogation was for standard parts and owner-accepted parts. It's out of scope today, but standard parts, I think we are all familiar. Owner-accepted parts, you have to know that for ELA 1 and 2 aircraft, the owner of the aircraft can propose to install on his or her own aircraft some parts without a 4.1 if they respect some criteria. It's still based on criticality, but there it was followed a slightly different approach with less conservatism than what we have in the derogation B3 and 4. Because basically the owner takes responsibility for their own aircraft. What came with issue 2 is that we left standard parts and owner-accepted parts, but we included the new derogation in B3. And I will explain this. In a nutshell, what the sub-memo provides, it explains the structure of 307 because we identified that there were differences. So we went through all the points and explained why we did what. It's explained again, the parts on B1 and B2 are kept. So you will find more or less the same wording with some adjustment because of course the rules changing in the meantime, but the concept remain. And then we had a lot of details on B3, which I'm going to explain to you in the next slides. So the first point is who can use the derogation. That was a very long discussion. So in the CRD, we received some comments on that. And you have to know that we try to identify list of parts that could be eligible for such a derogation, but we ended up in an assessment that almost 99% of the time we said, no, we can make the assessment ourselves. It must be done by the design approval order because they know what it means for that part to be non-conforming on their design. So only the design approval order can propose those parts to be delivered without a Form 1. And again, it's not a must. They can do it, but they don't have to do it. We explain what means negligible effect. Of course, it's linked to the compliant demonstration. So as we know, we have also requirements in Part 21 for ICA. So we expect that as part of the compliance to that requirement, if ICA are part of a certain change, the design approval holder applicant before being the holder, they have to make the assessment if they want to use the derogation, that for those parts, the effect of a non-conformity is negligible. You will see that, or you maybe know already that in the certification memo, there is an appendix which provides a table that gives some example of how this assessment can be recorded. They are examples, they can be used. The design approval order will have to make sure that those examples fit to their case. And this is part of the compliance demonstration that they will have to propose. And it will have to be assessed before issuing the declaration of compliance. So clearly it's linked to the compliance demonstration, and this is where the verification plays a role, because depending on how deep the compliance was for some parts, that part can provide criteria that can be used to ensure that the conformity effects are negligible. It's very important the use of the derogation has no impact on classification of change. So the derogation can be used for a minor change or for a major change. It can be actually used also for the owner of the design through 21A90C, if I'm not mistaken, which is a new requirement for ICA, where standalone ICA can also be approved. So also as part of this standalone ICA approval, such derogation can be used. And of course, the process will have to be approved within the DOA procedures. But nothing to do with classification minor minor. A minor change does not mean that the part can be installed without Form 1. At the same time, a major change does not mean that they cannot be installed. So it can be used in both cases. they have to be identified in the ICA. So we expect that the installer of those parts clearly see in the ICA in the way that the design approval holder finds suitable for their ICA and manuals, that certain part can be installed, and in the same location they can identify which verification can be done to apply the derogation. We had a lot of questions if a new part number has to be identified for those parts. As you all know, it's a decision of the design holder to give their part number or to use the commercial part number of a part. In case that they want to use the derogation, they can change the part number of that part. They don't have to. We thought about cases where this may be useful. For example, you may have one part which is part of an aircraft and it's installed in many locations, but only in some location the effect is negligible. So the design holder can think, okay, for that part, in order to avoid confusion, I will give a specific part number. It's a way, it's not the only way. It can be done also in other ways. And they have to identify in the ICA also if there are additional verification activities. It's important to clarify, those activities have to be simple in nature. So first of all, maybe a step back. Of course, we expect candidate parts for this derogation to be parts which are not bearing safety function. Typically, they are commercial off the shelf. It's not only that, but they should not provide information which are important for the conduct of the flight or for the safety margin of the aircraft. But still, as we know, some parts, they can have an effect on safety even if they are not bearing safety function. In case of a failure, in case of we want to, they do not spoil other parts. So that has to be assessed. And typically, this is what we expect to be of support for identifying verification activities for the installer. Some example that you see here, some technical data. So in some cases, it may be enough to make sure that the part is meeting the certification assumption that certain geometric data are met. In other cases, availability of test certificates. We made the example before of flammability test. We received question of what kind of test certificate we have to indicate. I think this really depends on the case, and it's the responsibility of the design approval holder to identify if that type of evidence is sufficient in that case. We will review case by case. We hope we can give better guidance in the future because, of course, we are still in a learning phase. This is very new. And I have to say, from my experience, since the rule was out and applicable, and I'm looking at my DOA colleagues, I think many of your colleagues, DOA, are trying to use some of them. I think they're using it already, but it's not so straightforward. So I think we are still also learning on our side. We receive interesting questions, so we are happy to see the first results of that. But I hope in the future we can provide even better and more detailed examples. So clearly the aim here is to make your life easier, but we have to make sure that we do within the boundary of acceptable safety. It's very important. We do not expect that the installer make compliance demonstration. So this is done during approval. The holder can check some information, let's call them information. They can perform some activities of simple nature, but they should not be used to complete the compliance demonstration loop. And one example that we had is about tests that can be done on the aircraft. And I have to say, I will be very honest with you, we are still discussing internally about that, but the bottom line is compliance demonstration is done during approval. Installer can do some check on the aircraft, but they don't have to be a repetition of compliance demonstration. They have to be aimed to make sure that the effect of a non-conformity are not affecting the safety of the aircraft. Regarding conformity, so Form 1 is not required. Form 1 is an authorization release certificate. It has a specific meaning. It bears a lot of information with it. It also provides the goal of ensuring conformity, but when a Form 1 is not required, we want that conformity still to be there. And this is not something that aviation has invented. Conformity is an issue for all industry, so we have a way to do that. C of C is one way, but it's not the only way. And you have to know that this is also providing information of conformity, how it's proved for standard parts. And so we have been quite flexible on that. It's important that one can see for a certain part what is the part number and what is the manufacturer of that. Because ultimately, if there is an issue, there has to be means to assess what was the issue. It's important to think about occurrences, of course. So typically, we would not expect that a part identified as not requiring a Form 1 can lead to an unsafe condition. So if that's the case, clearly there should not be. But we cannot exclude that within an occurrence, there could be the need to assess that. So we said, okay, in the third memo, it is clarified, should not be the case, but if required, the design approval holder has to make their investigation anyway. They cannot say this part is without Form 1, it's not our problem. They have to investigate and take into account that lack of information. And last point, there is no need of an EPA marking according to support Q. Last point on international agreements. As we know, there are bilaterals in place. Bilaterals address also Form 1, Form 8130 for the FAA. So when we are working within bilaterals, we cannot use directly this relaxation. There are discussions ongoing. It's not clear how long they will take, but as many of you know, also the FAA has a similar concept. And of course, it's slightly different, so we have to find a way to align, ideally also with the other authorities. So within the bilaterals, we cannot accept. So if you identify in your design parts that do not need a Form 1, if you validate that in the States, it's not an automatic recognition of that. It's even the other way around, because the bilateral expect that there is an ARC. So you will have to work with Form 1 at A130 for the time being. Differently, if a certain design is approved in Europe and there is no bilateral, if they use the derogation, that's okay. And of course, if it goes on any other non-EU register, then it's for the state of registry to check what they expect. And I think I'm done. So I think now is the time for questions. How does it work? Slido is for... Okay.
Yes, Annabeth Roman, Air France. Good morning. Back on the slide 13, just you indicate that EPA is not mandatory, is not required. If I remember well, when we said that we put this letter EPA, it's just for traceability in case of accident, to show that this part is not a part coming from the TC holder. Mm-hmm. And now, if we remove this, that means the responsibility of this part that has been installed by STC, under STC, by someone that is not a TC holder, gives this responsibility of this part to the TC holder. So I believe it is not good.
Okay, thank you. So clearly that's not the intent. In case of an accident, they would go on the records of the IRCA and they would see that that part was installed through the ICA. And we said also in the third memo that also the service bulletin has to provide this information. So the record should give evidence how that part was installed. So we don't expect that this will go to the design approval holder.
Okay, Stefano, do we have a look at the Slido first?
Can I do a question just? Sorry. And a
question
from TV Portugal. I'd like to tell you a story. So we sent an aircraft to perform a check in the Baltic country, in MRO. We sent them placards using this interior placard using this concept, and they did not accept to implement them in the aircraft, stating that their national authority did not accept to implement as a Part 145 any parts without a Form 1. So my question to EASA is, how are you checking that all national authorities have implemented this?
I mean, this is part of the normal standardization activities. I cannot say what are the results of the standardization activities because I'm not involved in part 145 right now, but certainly this is part of a standardization activity. So if the regulation says this is possible, it should be accepted as long as it meets the requirements. So as long as there is something from the design approval holder saying that this part and this is identified in the documentation in the ICAs, that should be enough for the authority to agree on that. So if they have a problem, then it's something that we have to be, we will deal through standardization.
Stefano, you want to add something?
Yes, there are other.
Just wanted to perhaps give the chance to slide questions. Is implementation of 21A307 considered as a DOA significant change?
Okay, so far we are considering it as significant change because at the end if a design approval holder wants to introduce provisions and wants to identify parts without an EASA Form 1 because they have to demonstrate that this is not a critical part and it has a negligible effect, this is something that so far we are dealing with, as far as I recall, as a significant change, if I'm not mistaken. So it doesn't mean it takes a lot of time to evaluate. It will be a case by case, but we have to see that you are able to demonstrate that the effect on safety is negligible.
Okay. We have a question from the audience here.
Thank you. Good morning, Federico Marziali. It's a similar question to the top story, and I would just like to know if there is a point of contact where we can point to the national authorities, inspectors, to get in touch so that they get explained that the rules have changed and they have to accept the parts. Is there like a mailbox or somewhere we can point the people? Because, I mean, this problem is real and it's very big.
Okay, since this is a question with the national authorities because of Part 145 implementation, you would have to contact the Part 145 colleagues. I believe they have a mailbox called MOA. And if not, if you have any contacts in the continuing airworthiness rulemaking section in FS1, you can contact them. But there is a mailbox for continuing airworthiness questions and it's on the website.
But I think we can take these questions. There are two cases, so I think we can pass the message. So we will take this opportunity to do it.
We have another one from the audience there. The microphone is coming from your left.
Yeah, for Stefano's awareness, and so we decided.
Hello, Dennis Santamaria from Eurocomposite. Start with an apology. You invited us to this meeting, and I am gonna be a little bit critical, if you don't mind. This Form 1 without a Form 1 certificate is not new. We brought this up in 2013, and EASA agreed to take this on. Since then, we welcomed EASA to put out a procedure, which it took 10 years, not normal. It took 10 years to come out with this procedure, which we had asked you to do, and now it is available, and I find it strange that it's available, there's a regulation out, good guidance material, a very good video. We prepared our procedure, and I've been in communication with you, Mr. Fico, to look at our procedure. We gave it to EASA 9 months ago, and for some reason, it's being dragged on with this procedure and many DOAs that are hesitant. But we asked for it, it's available, it's a good privilege, and I feel that with the guidance material available, why are we dragging this? It is a procedure that we can make out, and we made it out, we've given it out to EASA, but why are we delaying it? There's a regulation out, there's a guidance material out, we're following it, and yet we have this meeting today discussing something that's been on for 1 year. Sorry if I'm being critical, but that's my question. Why can't we use the procedure today if we have a good procedure available? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. So clearly there are, I understand. Yeah. Like it's I take the elements from it and I try to provide also support for the others. So I understand you are working within a company that is trying to use the procedure, but it's not yet completed. So I guess you are in the process of revising in a significant change, but this is not yet completed, right?
So it's correct that you are a DOA asking to have this identified. I mean, you are not a maintenance organization trying to use the procedure.
Okay.
You are a DOA.
Okay.
Okay. So in that case, I suppose it's in our hands, in the DOA team, is in the evaluation of the change to your organization to identify that. As I said, we treat it as a significant change. Unfortunately, we have certain delays because of workload, not only for significant changes, but also for initial investigations. And we are trying to do as much as we can.
But anyway, the scope, the target today was to provide guidance to the overall audience. There are DOA interested, but they have not started yet. So I know that the cert memo was needed. So today it's an update. The cert memo is out since June. It was actually published in December last year. And as I said in the beginning, there is also a challenge in the fact that you're right. It's a very old concept, but it started in a different way. It received hundreds of comments. So this is a proof that it's not something that it's so straightforward, and we are trying to make it work. But we are committed to do it. And the reason why we are providing this presentation today, it's exactly because we want to make it work. And I think we need to gather time and experience to make it work better. So your feedback is valuable, is very important, and it helps also the other to understand that there has to be some effort in it, and it will take some time. But thank you for raising this.
Stefano, before we go to the next question from the audience, perhaps we can ask a question from the Slido.
Yes.
Obviously, we have some related to part 145, so one Anton, as you said, perhaps we need to involve our colleagues there. There is one question which states, could you clarify why EPA marking is not required?
Yeah, it was a relaxation. It was to make it easy. I think we have received the feedback from the colleagues in the audience. I think on that one, I will take the question also with your points, and I will try to provide better elements on that. I don't remember the details exactly, but the overall concept was to reduce the number of requirements, to treat them as part for which we don't expect normal production check. But it's fair to address the overall question, so I will take these two and provide a feedback. I think we have opportunity, right, to provide answer after the... Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, we have another question from the audience there.
Hello, my name is Borjan Palčić. I'm coming from CA Slovenia. And I have a question regarding to the alternative of certificate of conformity.
Mm-hmm.
You said that some alternatives are acceptable as a flexibility. Let's say for standard parts like screws, fittings in general, would, for example, bill of sale, yes, with a specific identification of the part, and then the manufacturer be acceptable in this case as an alternative to certificate of conformity?
We have in the cert memo an explanation that the delivery note is acceptable. Bill of sale, I think it provides the same information from what you're explaining, so I would say yes.
Thank you.
Okay, here on your right.
Hello, my name is Lilian Lagadi from PMD Engineering in France. So I have a question regarding the verification activities to be asked to the installer of the part. So you took an example of parts to be installed in cabin and eligible to this derogation. And one example of activity of verification ask is verify that the part comply with flammability requirements. Do we agree that this flammability requirement is not necessarily compliance to, for example, 25.853? CS requirement, it can be another industrial standard.
Yeah, I mean, that was an example. So, as we said, compliance is done by the design approval holder. They have to see, in practical terms, if that is the only issue, and if it can be simply reduced to that, so it means that all the other potential non-conformity will not have a safety effect on the aircraft. They have to define how that can be given. So they can say, you have to provide this type of certificate. It's case by case. We didn't want to be so specific because we want to leave it to you to have the flexibility to see how it can work. It's important that what you will put in the SCA can be used by the installer. So yes, we are not mandating a certain standard. It depends on the requirements for the part.
Thank you.
I would like to complement on that. What you cannot ask the installer is to do the flammability testing.
Yes. Yeah.
So what you can ask the installer is in the instructions is check that you have a certificate compliant with certain flammability check. But it's up to the design approval holder to know that this is enough for compliance demonstration. It's just a verification afterwards.
So if I were the design approval holder, I would check with the manufacturer of that part what kind of certificate they can easily provide with that part. If it meets my expectation, I would propose that.
We have time for our last question.
Yes, we can take 2 or 3 questions. We have 5 minutes left.
Okay. Not choosing between Slido and the audience, I can give the microphone to Jans Devine about his Slido question.
Thanks, Nicholas. Ian Devine here from EAMA. You mentioned for those parts without Form 1, my question would be the obligations for setting up the arrangement, DOPO, similar, regarding occurrence reporting, etc., and then also the issuance of a statement of approved design data, if these obligations still hold true when we're talking about parts without Form 1.
No, this is not required. So clearly we are talking about parts out of the normal POA environment. And we have been very clear with ourselves as well. Those parts we accept that if there is a non-conformity, it's done, it's acceptable. Whatever happens on that specific non-conformity that the design approval holder has assessed, so we don't need to have any arrangement in place. We just want to know that that part has this specific part number as it's identified on the design, and it is manufactured by that manufacturer. Because if there is an issue, it should not be, but if there is an issue, because we can have we need to have a minimum of information to try to work on traceability. So as you can see, it's like a blanket. You pull it on one side, you get the other side uncovered. And that's what it makes it so complicated. We have received comments in both directions that in some areas we've done too much, in some areas we have not done enough. So we have to try to make everybody happy and first of all, the safety, of course, of the aircraft.
Just for the obligations for a 21J regarding production efficiencies in these type of parts is then removed.
Sorry.
For occurrence reporting.
Can you repeat the question?
The obligations for a 21J for these type of parts regarding production efficiencies are therefore relaxed because there's no link.
There is no link. So there is no need of a DOPO arrangement with that for that specific part with that manufacturer.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Do you want to add something?
Sorry, Federico Marziale again. I have a follow-up question. So if I'm delivering parts as part of a line fit to the PO, then I will have in SADD only the parts with Form 1 and the others, I just tell them, or how? I mean, my concern is that the PO wouldn't know, okay, I get this other part. Are they supposed to purchase them directly and install it in the line fit with the other parts for which we have SADD?
So production under POA, it's a different issue. We are talking about parts which are installed on the aircraft after production.
Sometimes they are in line fit. I mean, sometimes I give it...
The POA have to have their procedure for installing those parts. So in that case, they can use their procedure. There is no difference from them. They don't need to have a Form 1 when they install them, even if the part is not required to have a Form 1.
maybe I'll ask in a different way. So it's not forbidden to put this part in this ADD.
It's not forbidden to put a part on the...
Parts without Form 1 in the SA, in the statement of proof design data.
I honestly am not, I don't work with POA, so I don't know exactly what this statement is.
I mean,
I don't know if
guess it's still approved.
I see Francesco is trying to help me. Go ahead, Francesco.
I think the good compromise is to identify document among the design data which identify this non-approved part,
okay,
a configuration of this non-approved part, so that the POA receive this list of a non-approved part, and then they can apply their procedure as part of the whole set of design data. I think this is the best way, no, to identify, so that the POA knows.
All right, thank you.
So thank you very much. We have more questions, but we don't want to have issues with the time after the first presentation. So we can come back to you later on for the pending questions.
So thank you very much. I think I will take the other questions and provide feedback via me.
Thank you, everyone, and Stefano.